Well, today we are starting a series titled At the Lake. Yesterday it kind of felt like we were under the lake, but it's summertime, and I hope everyone is getting out and going and getting out in nature when we have the chance. I want you to enjoy yourselves this summer. I know that this morning there are people that are at the lake. We've got some people in the Black Hills. We thought we might have some people playing softball, but no longer in the tournament. Is that okay? Our thoughts and prayers are with you, right? But like lake culture around here is huge. Back in Indiana, we don't have that because we don't have many lakes. But around here it's huge. And I hope if you're a lake person, you get some lake time. But I also hope that when you're in town that you prioritize worshiping with us together and be part of this series. Because each Sunday we are going to look at an encounter that people had with Jesus near a lake. Okay, encounters with Jesus near a lake. Jesus did a lot of ministry near the lake. And it's my hope that throughout the summer that we all get to encounter Jesus as we gather here together, but also as we explore God's good creation. Here in a few weeks, we're going to be in the mountains and maybe even see a lake mountain. It's the best kind of lake. We want to get out and enjoy God's good creation before all the snow in the world comes back and tortures us again, right? How many people here grew up with Sesame Street? Did you grow up watching Sesame Street?
Oh, in Canada they have Sesame Park.
Sesame Park in Canada. Okay. Well, Sesame Street at least, we had every episode had a word for the day or a letter of the day or a number of the day, right? And today we have a word for the day. We got a word for the day. Our word for the day is hold, or holding. Hold is the word for the day. And words have a range of meaning, don't they? Like you can ask me, oh, are you on the phone? It's like, I'm on hold, right? If a police officer suspects that someone is holding, that means narcotics are involved. In Texas Hold'em, it's the cards, your hold cards, right? If you're Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold 'em. If you're Elton John, it's hold me closer, tiny dancer. If you're about to do some foolish thing, the idea is hold my beer, right? Okay, I'm going to date myself, right? If anybody remembers one of my favorite cartoon characters from my childhood, it's Quick Draw McGraw. If you're him, it's hold on there a minute. If you're getting married, it's to have and to hold. Holding can mean land held by a lease. It can mean stocks, property, assets. But today I'm going to ask you, what are you holding? What are you holding? There are some things that we need to hold tightly to, right? Our family, our faith, our relationship with Jesus. But maybe there's some things that we're holding that we need to let go of. So I'm going to tell you up front, that's where we're going with this. But first, we're going to look at our first passage. We're going to look at two passages, Matthew chapter 4 and Matthew chapter 8, and both of them are Jesus near a lake, okay? We're going to start in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. It says, when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. Land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people living in darkness have seen a great light. And those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. From that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. Now, at the beginning of this passage, it starts out, Jesus heard that John was put in prison. This is John the Baptist. John the Baptist was the most famous preacher in all of Israel for a period of time before Jesus. And John's calling was to prepare the way for the Messiah, to prepare the way for Jesus. So John's years of ministry sparked a revival among the people. The people started paying attention to God again. The people started anticipating what God might do. They were anticipating and expecting the long foretold Messiah was going to arrive and liberate Israel. And Jesus heard that John was arrested and put in prison. I think Jesus at that point, he realized, it's time. It's time for me to begin what I was sent here to do. It's time to leave the small village of Nazareth. I mean, he was just in a small village and head to a larger city of Capernaum. So he went and moved near the lake. And this is where he began to first preach. And his preaching was summed up, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Turn to the kingdom of heaven. And his move there, it was a strategic one. Because he would have more people to preach to, and news of what he was doing was going to spread much faster in that lakeside community. And Matthew, who wrote this gospel, he was quoting the prophet Isaiah. And he was saying the people there were living in darkness. The people were living in the land of the shadow of death. And I know I often point out how very different their world was from ours. The world of the people in Jesus' day was a very different world from ours. And there are things that they experienced that we can't relate to. They were a conquered people in a conquered land, occupied by the Roman Empire. But although we're not like them, I think, can we relate to living in darkness? Can we relate to living in the land of the shadow of death? We might not live in a war-torn country, but I mean, we may have more wealth than any other country in the world, but we know darkness. Those things don't insulate us from darkness. We know what evil can do. We know abuse. We know loneliness. We know isolation. We know injustice. We know addiction. We know death. And for those of us who, in that place of that world of darkness, we've experienced the kingdom of heaven come near. For those of us who have experienced Jesus, we've experienced his light. And his light shines in our darkness. And if you turn to follow him, that means his light shines in our darkness. He wants to shine that light in our darkness and chase away that darkness. Darkness has no defense against light when we allow that light to shine in. And then the passage goes on. As Jesus was walking along beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. And this is a scene of Jesus calling his first disciples. And what we need to understand is he called disciples. This means that Jesus began his ministry assuming the role of rabbi. A rabbi was a spiritual teacher. Although he was assuming the role of rabbi, what he did here was not customary. What he did was not customary. Jesus does things that blow everybody's expectations for how he should behave all the time. You see, no self-respecting rabbi would go looking for his own disciples. That would be considered beneath a trained rabbi. Disciples were supposed to seek out a rabbi and apply and hopefully get in. But Jesus didn't have that kind of ego that needed to be fed. Jesus goes in search of his own disciples. And maybe because only people trained in a rabbinical tradition, only those who had been to a rabbinical school would even think to approach a rabbi. I mean, fishermen wouldn't think to do that. I mean, why would a fisherman apply to be a disciple of a rabbi? Because they weren't rabbinically trained. I mean, why would a rabbi take us? I mean, that'd be like me trying to apply for the NBA. They're not asking me to, right? I mean, I'm slow and I can't handle the ball well, but I make up for that by being short and not having a very good jumper. The NBA doesn't want me. And Jesus makes his second non-conformity move here. He doesn't want trained rabbis as disciples. You realize how much they would have to unlearn to be able to follow Jesus. Instead, he finds ordinary people, he finds fishermen. And he relates what he's calling them to what he wants them to do. He says, oh, you've been fishing for fish? Well, follow me and you're going to fish for people. Follow me and together we're going to bring people into God's kingdom. Now, on first glance, it might appear as if Jesus just, a complete stranger, just wanders along, walked up and says, follow me. And they're like, oh, a complete stranger wants us to follow everything, drop everything and follow him? Sure. But that's not the case. Remember, revival had broken out. The people's hearts had been prepared through the ministry of John the Baptist. These were men who were anticipating the Messiah. And Jesus had been preaching the good news of the kingdom around town for at least a bit. They had heard him speak. They'd had a few encounters with Jesus. These were people who had been living in darkness. These are people who had been living in the land of the shadow of death, who had been praying for light, looking for the arrival of light. They were men living with the hope that the Messiah would come and deliver them from their darkness. And when Jesus came and said, follow me, they knew in their hearts, this is the one. And they dropped the nets that they were holding and they followed him. You know, sometimes people refer to these fishermen as lowly fishermen. They were just lowly fishermen. Listen, fishermen certainly weren't the elites. They weren't the super wealthy, but fishing was a well-paying business. And this is in an era where 90% of the population were in poverty. Dropping their nets, leaving their boats behind, was abandoning a comfortable living when there wasn't much comfort to go around. I mean, many others would not have dropped their nets. And Jesus didn't explicitly tell them to drop their nets, but they knew that they could not drag their nets with them and follow him. So they dropped them. And James and John left more than their boats behind. They left their father. Now, understand, this was a family business, and this was a culture where honoring your parents was the highest priority. But they couldn't follow Jesus and remain in the family business. It was something else that they were holding on to that they let go of in order to follow. You know, often people have an encounter with Jesus. They recognize that Jesus is the light, the answer for their darkness, but they're holding on to something and they just can't let go of it. Sometimes we try and tell ourselves we can have both. I can hold on to this and still follow Jesus, but we don't get far following Jesus when we're dragging a net. Is there something you're holding on to that you need to let go of? They let go of, and here's what they experienced. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. They would have never seen all that had they held on to their nets. They would have experienced the good, life-giving news of the kingdom of heaven had they stayed anchored to their nets. It's a good thing that they let go. Because they were now part of something big, revolutionary, and news about Jesus spread throughout the region. Fast forward to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. By this time, crowds were flocking to Jesus, so much so that sometimes Jesus said, we need a break. Jesus was human. He ran out of energy just like anyone else. In Matthew chapter 8, it says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." You see what happened? Rabbi Jesus had become a famous rabbi. And now a teacher of the law came knocking. This was someone who had been to rabbinical school. And he was now applying to be Jesus' disciple. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes we lie to ourselves and we believe it. I'll follow you anywhere. Oh yeah? Well, Jesus said, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. I mean, Jesus and his disciples were on the road. It was unpredictable where they'd spend that night or where they were going after that. And this is the last time we hear of this teacher of the law, because he obviously didn't mean what he said. I mean, what net was he holding? Was it comfort? Was it predictability? Certainty? But he wasn't the only one who came and approached Jesus. Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." It's kind of harsh. He won't let the man go to his dad's funeral? Okay. It sounds harsh, but listen, it really wasn't. It wasn't like the man's father's funeral was later that day or that week. Okay, when someone died, you don't call the funeral home and say, "Hey, can we do a funeral on Thursday?" It's not how it worked back then. They didn't have embalming. They didn't have refrigeration. Funerals started right now. Somebody died, the funeral starts right now. Mourners show up right away. You take the body and go bury it right away. And then the family would go into their home and be in seclusion for a week. So if the man's father had just died, he wouldn't be talking to Jesus. He wouldn't have time. Odds are the man's father was likely alive. Like, he was fine. Odds are he had years to go. But this was a man holding to the cultural and religious expectations, to being beholden to family above all else. And he may not have felt released to go make his own choices or pursue a calling to follow Jesus until his father one day passed away. It's like, yeah, one day when my dad dies and I bury him, then I'll follow you. So it could have been that, or it could have meant, and this is going to sound weird, it could have meant this. It could mean that the man's father was already dead and buried. Why would he need to bury his father if his father's already dead and buried? There was a practice at the time where the eldest son would wait for up to a year and then rebury their father. They would wait until the body was fully decomposed and then take the bones and place them in a container, and then that container would be put in an entombment wall. So he might have been dead and buried, and the man was saying, "Well, I will follow you after I rebury my father." Again, this is a man whose life and calling to follow Jesus was immobilized by this expectation to wait around for the purpose of filling societal expectations. It was his net that he couldn't let go of, because what would people think of me if I don't stick around and bury my father? Okay, I want to be clear here. The disciples that we've mentioned so far, We're being called to a traveling ministry, specifically. Because these were disciples. They were being called to a traveling ministry, meaning that they were going to leave and follow Jesus and spread the gospel around the region. Now, some people here in this room might be one day, maybe you are called to go somewhere else for the sake of the gospel. My family and I moved 7 years ago, 2016. We moved to North Dakota for the sake of the gospel. We were called to minister for 5 years in Williston, and now we've moved here feeling called to plant this church here in Bismarck, in the BisMan area. So some people are called to go. I have friends in Bosnia and Croatia who went for the sake of the gospel. But most people aren't called to go. They're called to live out their faith here. But at the same time, we might be holding onto something that prevents us from fully following the way of Jesus. We might be holding on to something that prevents us from going into an intimate relationship with Jesus. We might be holding on to something that prevents us from experiencing the light of Jesus shining into our darkness. Jesus welcomes everyone as they are. But when he invites us, he calls us to follow him. Luke 9:23. It's unavoidable what he says here. He said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me." Daily. Our relationship with Jesus is meant to be daily. Not just Sundays. And he says, deny yourself. Deny myself? That's not very American. That doesn't fit our consumeristic culture. Pick up your cross. I mean, the cross was a torturous device of death. And you might say, I thought Jesus wanted me to be happy. Listen, to be truly happy, to know real joy, it doesn't come from being self-centered. Jesus is the light that shines in darkness. Jesus is the way to life, and life to the full. But the way to light and life doesn't come by making me the center of my universe, by putting myself first. It comes by putting Jesus as the center of my universe. It comes by putting Jesus first. This verse is part of a larger passage that says this: "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self?" Even if you have the whole world to gain, Jesus was saying, let go. Are you holding something that keeps you from surrendering to Jesus? I may be on repeat on this, but the original sin, the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden in Genesis, it wasn't about fruit or forbidden tree. The choice they made was to abandon putting God first. They abandoned keeping God central to their existence, and instead they placed themselves first. And Jesus was saying, if you want to be my disciple, I need to be central in your life. And sometimes we hear that and we are afraid. We're afraid. What if I let go of my net? What if I give him control of my life? I'm afraid of what he's going to do if I give him control of my life. And sometimes we're afraid of what we're going to lose rather than recognizing what we have to gain. We're afraid if I let go, I lose something. Jesus said that if you don't let go, we lose everything. But as we let go, we gain everything. See, surrender brings light and life. And holding on to being our own gods, we remain in darkness. Holding on, we remain in darkness. Holding on, we prevent Jesus from being able to flood us with his life and his light. And here's the thing. Maybe you have trusted somebody that's let you down. Maybe all you've known are people in your life that have let you down. But we're not surrendering to a power-hungry tyrant. We're not surrendering to a selfish God. We are surrendering to the one who left his seat in eternal glory to come down here and breathe our dust. And he picked up his own cross, literally his own cross. He allowed evil men to nail him to it for your sake. That you might live in his light and in his life. And I want you to hear me very carefully. Don't mistake this as needing to earn God's favor. Because he favors you already. He loves you already. You are his beloved from the moment that you were conceived in your mother's womb. He favors you as a gift of grace. He doesn't care about the things that you've done. He just simply wants you to come to him and receive his light and receive his life. He invites you into his kingdom. And the way of his kingdom is not the one where we are our own gods. It is where he is central to everything. And when we understand and embrace that is when we truly start living. Are you holding on to something that you need to let go of in order to follow Jesus and live in his light? Are you holding on to something that is hindering your relationship with Jesus? If there is, now's the moment to let go.